Welcome, everyone. There has been a significant progress in deep learning in the past decade, and the conversation about deep learning today almost always includes explainable AI. In current deep learning network architectures, deeper layers in network tend to contain hundreds of independent neurons, which makes it hard for humans to understand how they interact with each other. It raises a question: is there any way to organize the neurons for better understanding or explainability? Interestingly, we are going to be talking about a recent work in which author used an approach inspired by self-organization maps to group the neurons based on the correlation. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Muhammad Rehman Zafar, and I am a co-stream honor of ML interpretability at Aggregate Intellect. Today, we are hosting Randy Tan. Randy Tan is a current PhD student at Ryerson University, where he also received his master's degree. Randy's area of research include statistical machine learning, human action recognition, signal processing, deep learning, and explainable artificial intelligence. His most recent work was published in IEEE's International Joint Conference on Neural Networks within the World Congress on Computational Intelligence. The work, titled Locality Guided Neural Networks for Explainable Artificial Intelligence, focuses on clustering neurons in each layer of a deep learning model so that they can be analyzed together instead of individually. It is highly interesting presentation, and I am looking forward to it. To the audience, please post your questions in the chat, and we will be asking your questions immediately after the presentation. So without further delay, I will now turn the presentation over to Randy.
Hello, my name is Randy Tan. As mentioned earlier, I am a PhD candidate at Ryerson University with supervisors Professor Naimul Khan and Professor Ling Wan. Today, I wish to present my work on locality-guided neural networks for explainable artificial intelligence. Deep learning is state-of-the-art in many domains, such as image processing and natural language processing. Software toolkits, for example, PyTorch and TensorFlow, let domain experts that are novices in deep learning train networks. Unfortunately, the black box nature of deep learning makes it hard to use in critical domains, such as medical diagnoses, job screening, and self-driving cars. Explainable artificial intelligence tries to make AI models more understandable by humans. XAI methods can be separated into two streams, which include post hoc methods and modified model methods. For post hoc methods, they are good at they explain decisions of models that have already been trained and are good at determining why AI models make their decisions, but they do not influence the learning since the model has already been trained. On the other hand, there are modified model methods which modifies AI model structure before training such that the way they learn is more understandable by humans. Most of these models are customized for a specific task and are therefore not generalizable. For my specific method, my goals are to cluster neurons in a deep learning model such that they can be analyzed together instead of individually. I wish to have the clustering happen during training rather than in post hoc. And I also wish to change the learning algorithm rather than the model itself, such that my method can be applied to any state-of-the-art model. SOM, or self-organizing maps, is an artificial neural network used for dimensionality reduction and clustering. SOM is often compared to k-means, but SOM uniquely enforces a local topology on neurons thanks to a neighborhood function. G of j is a gradient which comes from the distance between the neuron itself and the input, and the weight update equation is shown below. This work is inspired by self-organizing maps, but is adjusted to work with deep learning. SOM does not work well in deep structures due to the fact that it gets its gradients from the input, but only offers a singular node as the output. Methods using SOM in deep learning tend to only use it as a singular output layer. For my method, I will be changing the gradient for deep learning, and the gradient will come from backpropagation instead of the input. Weight updates will happen in batches, and for each batch, each node will have a unique accumulated gradient. Below, I show the weight update stage for self-organizing maps, but I am going to replace the SOM update with the backpropagation gradient instead of the gradient that comes from the input. This new update has a gradient for each node, therefore the neighborhood function needs to shift. I denote index j for the node being updated and node k for the node with the gradient. We can recall that the summation on the right-hand side is equivalent to the convolution operation, and we assume that the learning rate, alpha, is constant for one batch. Therefore, we can approximate the neighborhood functions that SOM performs by simply low-pass filtering. Our algorithm only takes neighborhood functions from SOM. It does not take the gradients from the input, and it does not apply winner-take-all currently, although I am planning to add it back in the future. Therefore, we call our algorithm locality-guided neural networks to avoid confusion with self-organizing maps. The benefits to my approach is that locality-guided neural networks only affects the gradient update during training, and therefore inference is unchanged. Low-pass filtering is applied to the gradients after they have been accumulated. Therefore, if we change the image and batch size, it should not heavily affect training time. Also, network structure is unaffected. Therefore, I can apply my method to any state-of-the-art deep learning model. So for my experiments, there are 3 different types of experiments I perform. The first one is a performance comparison between several baseline networks and networks that have been trained through LGNN. Next, we do a locality comparison between the networks that were trained in the previous experiment. Finally, I do an XAI analysis on LGNN trained networks. So LGNN targets explainability, but we still need to see if it comes at the cost of clustering performance. In traditional literature, SOM is often compared to k-means, where the topology of SOM comes at the cost of clustering performance. Zafar 100 will be used as my testing data set, where the models I will experiment with include VGG11, VGG19, wide Resnet 16.8, and wide Resnet 2810. For all 4 of these networks, I initially create 5 random seeded models, and I use them to train both the baseline and LGNN networks, and then I get the median result. All networks use batch norm. VGG had the fully connected layers replaced with a singular fully connected layer. Wide Resnet uses the dropout version with a dropout of 0.3. The optimizer used was stochastic gradient descent with a momentum of 0.9 and a weight decay of 0.0005. The other hyperparameters for training are shown below. For the neighborhood function, I used a 3x3 Gaussian low-pass filter with a sigma of 0.5. When applying the neighborhood function, replication padding was used. I tested 2 different types of neighborhood functions. In the first version, the sigma of the low-pass filter stayed constant at 0.5 for all epochs, which would lead to better topology enforcement. And in the second version, sigma decreased per epoch in the equation shown below, which would be more akin to traditional SOM. Here are the median results for VGG11 and VGG19. You can see on the right-hand side that for the constant and decreasing versions of LGNN, the performances were relatively similar. On the other hand, though, both LGNN versions beat the baseline by approximately 0.2 and 0.4% respectively. For wide Resnet, we had 3 different configurations where we applied LGNN to different layers of the network. In the first version, the only layers that we applied LGNN to were the main branch of the res blocks. In the second version, we applied LGNN to all filters in the res blocks, which included the one-by-ones in the shortcuts. Finally, we applied LGNN to all filters in the network, which included the very first layer, which had very small number of filters, 16. Here are the results for wide ResNet. And as we can see in the second two configurations, wide ResNet had comparable accuracies, where there was a little bit more variance in wide ResNet 2810. In comparison, though, when we applied LGNN only to the filters in the main branch, we did not see as much of a performance gain. Therefore, I dropped the experiments for wide ResNet 2810. Overall, though, LGNN had higher accuracies compared to the baseline by 0.2% and 0.5% respectively. Overall, LGNN had a slight performance increase compared to the baseline networks. In wide ResNet, keeping LGNN on as many layers as possible did improve performance. Also, the performance increase grew with network size, and we attribute our performance increase due to the regularizing effect of low-pass filtering. Next, we observe filters trained from the performance experiment. We're specifically looking at the VGG networks since the VGG network is just a singular stream, and therefore it is easier to analyze and visualize. And initially, we are going to look at the first layer because the first layer has 3 input channels. Therefore, we can directly map these input channels to color. Here are the results. On the left-hand side, we see one of the examples of the baseline, and in the middle and the right, we can see a singular example of the LGNN filters for constant and decreasing. In the baseline filters, we can see several filters with relatively similar appearance. In this case, purple with slight gray hues. And although these filters have relatively similar appearance, their placement within the network or this layer specifically is fairly random. On the other hand, for both LGNN networks, we can see that there are clusters of filters that with similar appearances, and I have highlighted just a select few as an example. Overall, for LGNN, filters next to each other do indeed share visual similarities. Also, in the table below, I look at the magnitudes of the individual filters. And as we can see with the regular network, the difference in magnitude between the smallest magnitude and the largest magnitude is fairly large, while in the LGNN networks, the difference between the smallest magnitude and the largest magnitude is a lot closer together, which does indicate that LGNN does have a good regularizing effect on filter magnitudes. Next, we will also wish to analyze the final layer of VGG to see if locality still holds. We look at the filter weights and we notice that we no longer have 3 channels. Therefore, we need to use a different visualizing technique to analyze the last layer. Gram matrices usually find correlations between filters in a layer, where each individual row of a gram matrix shows the correlation between one of the filters in a layer and all of the other filters. So we can take the individual rows of the gram matrix and reshape them into the SOM dimensions, and then we can visualize that row as a heat map. Additionally, we could take the Google's Lucid Toolbox, which takes the network and generates an image that would maximally activate one of the filters in the network. Here are the results between the baseline and LGNN constant, just one of the networks for each. If you look at the heat maps on the top, the colored dot represents the filter in question. And as we can see for the filter in question, the local area around each of the dots is relatively blue, which means that there is a low correlation between the filter in question and all of the filters around it. When looking at the filter visualizations below, we can see that the patterns and shapes within each filter is fairly distinct with all of the filters surrounding it. On the other hand, when we look at the heat map for LGNN, we can see that the local area around each of the colored dots is relatively more red, which means that there is a higher amount of correlation between the filter in question and the local area surrounding it. And when looking at the filter visualizations below, we can see a lot of common shapes and or patterns with the filter in question and also the filters surrounding it. So, do these correlations actually translate to better organization? Do these clusters of neurons actually activate together if we feed the same inputs to a network? And also, can visualizing all of the channels give us a more global understanding of each layer? So for this next experiment, I feed all 100 test images for certain classes into the network and get the average activation in the last layer. I then normalize these activations and reshape them, and then represent them as a heat map, just like I did in the previous experiment. And yet again, I will also be providing a few visualizations from Google's Lucid Toolbox. And I will also be comparing heat maps for classes that share some similarities with each other. So here is my result. When I was looking through the Google visualizations of all of the filters, I did notice a small patch denoted by part K of the figure, where these filters did share some tree-like qualities to them. And so while interested in it, I fed 3 different tree classes into the network, shown in parts A, D, and G, which are the pine tree class, the maple tree class, and the palm tree class. And for this small cluster of similar appearing filters, I noticed that there were activations that occurred for all 3 of these classes in different proportions. But while looking at these clusters, I noticed another cluster, which was fairly large, denoted in part J of the figure, where if you look at parts B, E, and H of the figure, we can see that this other cluster also highly activated in different proportions for these 3 different tree classes. This experiment basically demonstrates the possibilities of LGNN, where instead of looking at individual neurons, we can look at the neuron and then have a general idea of what all of the neurons surrounding it are also looking for. So yeah, both clusters activated in different combinations for 3 different tree classes. For future work, I wish to improve LGNN for better clustering. As you noted in the XAI analysis, that although for the 3 different tree classes that those 2 clusters had different proportions of activations together, there were still several other activations that occurred in other parts of the layer. Better clustering the ideal clustering would probably lead to having only 1 cluster activate per class. And maybe several related classes have overlapping clusters. In order to improve LGNN, I might decide to add winner-take-all back to the forward pass in some kind of relaxed manner that would allow deep learning to still occur. Additionally, I would experiment with different combinations of hyperparameters to improve the clustering, maybe looking at the types of filters I use for the neighborhood function. And additionally, I can look at other types of data sets, for example, natural language processing, or sound processing, or video processing, to see if LGNN has benefits in these other types of data sets. I also wish to apply filter organization to video data, where many previous works talk about slope feature analysis in deep layers for temporal data. A lot of these previous works use transition models on individual frames. And For our specific work, LGNN, we know that we have clusters in the deepest layers of the network that activate per image. And so hopefully we can see how these clusters, the peaks of these clusters, can travel locally as each individual frame progresses within video data. Additionally, for future work, we can look at creating custom models that can take advantage of the clustering properties of LGNN. These networks could include graph-connected networks, two-stream networks with feature-level fusion, and also I could try combining hybrid learning, where I combine deep learning with statistical machine learning. In summary, I propose the method called locality guided neural networks, which organize filters within each layer of a deep learning network. People viewing each layer of an LGNN network can see clusters of correlated filters. Our results show that LGNN improves performance on VGG and wide Resnet for CFAR 100. We attribute the small performance increase of LGNN to the regularizing effect that low-pass filtering has on the filter weights. Additionally, in our experiments, we demonstrated that LGNN could cluster several tree filters together so that they can be analyzed together rather than individually. And I have future plans on using LGNN with temporal data and also custom deep learning models. Thank you for watching my presentation.
Thank you, Randy. We will start the QA session of this presentation, of the part of this presentation. Randy will. We are going to present some questions to Randy asked by the target audience, and the first question is, what explainability means to you in regarding this work?
So explainability can target several things, where there are several works that can kind of target explainability to a general audience. Very clearly, my network is only a tool and doesn't actually generate explanations. Therefore, the explainability in my method more targets towards experts of deep learning, where generally, even for experts of deep learning, due to the fact that each individual layer within the deepest layers of a network can be hundreds of filters, I try to cluster the filters together to make it easier to analyze the deeper layers of a network. But this type of explainability would probably not be suited for the general audience.
Okay, so this work is more targeted to the experts, not the intermediate or freshers.
Yes.
Okay, so we have a question from the target audience. The explanation seems very granular and designed to help debug the model. Is this primary benefit from using this approach?
So yes, just as explained earlier, this type of clustering is only really beneficial for deep learning experts or people who already know about deep learning to analyze their results. In the sense that we, in general, we know that that classifications from deep learning networks comes from multiple small activations. That's the whole benefit of deep learning networks, is that each of the individual neurons are a weak classifier, but we get strong classifications by having several neurons activate together and combine the results. But a lot of the analysis that we have been doing so far in XAI, especially if you look at visualization methods, for example, those from the Google Lucid Toolkit, is that a lot of analysis so far has been focused on looking only at individual neurons, which don't provide the whole picture of everything. My method hopefully brings those tools up to the next step by allowing you to analyze at least groups of neurons.
Okay, thank you. And the next question is from our co-stream owner. How is the insight from clustering helping us build better neural network?
So yet again, we know that we have individual neurons within our deep learning layers, and we know that they need to activate together in order to get good classifications. But yet again, the most analysis so far has been on individual neurons, and my work coincides with all of those works because now we can look at individual neurons, and when we look at those individual neurons and analyze them, at least we get a good semblance or understanding already of the local area around those neurons. When we analyze, for example, just one neuron within our network, we already get some kind of understanding of what the neurons around it are looking for. And also when we look at the activations, we can see that, for example, maybe a single or a single class, let's say some kind of tree, only activates a small cluster, a 2x2 cluster. So we can have a general idea that maybe for trees, you don't need that many filters to activate in order to classify a tree. But then maybe something more complex, like maybe a human, might require a larger area of filters. Let's say a 5x5 patch of filters. And that gives the deep learning expert an understanding of what types of input data affect the network and how much resources are required to understand for a network to understand different types of classes. And another example is for that 5x5 network or 5x5 patch of filters for a human, rather than having to look all over the network. So let's say VGG again. For VGG, the deepest layers is like 512 filters. Rather than looking at all 512 filters for all of the filters that are needed to classify human, we can look at one, and we could already know that there is that cluster of other filters that describe that human, rather than looking at all 512.
Thank you. And our next question is, your current experiments are applied to CNNs for image classifications. Can your work be applied to other domains like natural processing or medical datasets?
So my method, when I am applying the gradients, and I am also applying the low-pass filter on those gradients, the low-pass filter is applied along the channel dimension, and my work does not really interfere with the other dimensions. Specifically for images, that would be the length and width. I completely ignore those dimensions. Therefore, the type of data that my method can be applied to isn't necessarily restricted to image data. Although my experiments have been on image data, technically my method can be applied to other domains.
Okay. And the next question is, how does your method compare to other network visualization techniques like Disney and UMAP?
So a lot of works kind of validate their methods using post hoc methods like TSNE and UMAP. For these types of methods, these are post hoc, and they generally look to enforce a topology on the input data as seen through the network. Whereas my method, although it also applies a topology on the network, I am looking at the filter weights themselves rather than the input data. And also my method has an effect on the learning of the network rather than being purely post hoc.
All right. And who is the target audience or applications for your LGNN algorithm?
So the target audience for my LGNN method, yet again, are domain experts who already know about deep learning and wish to analyze the results of their training. This type of methodology would be fairly difficult to analyze for most deep learning novices still.
All right. And the next question is, in your XA analysis, your method seems to have plenty of activations in areas other than your cluster. Will this make analysis harder?
So yes, it does, and but that is mostly because when I presented this work in IJCNN, this work was relatively more of the possibilities of LGNN. It's still largely unrefined, and it's more still of a concept in testing. But I did demonstrate some possibilities of LGNN being able to cluster networks, neurons or filters together. And hopefully in the future, I can improve on the network such that the clustering performance is a lot stronger without sacrificing too much performance.
Okay, and the next question is, what is the computational efficiency of your method?
So the computational efficiency was one of the main targets of my method. Just as I noted before in my slides, that my method only affects training time. And even within training time, my method is only applied to the gradients after they have been accumulated. Therefore, in my experiments, I found that LGNN only took about 10% longer than the baseline training methods, where the training times were varied by the network size. So looking at the largest of the networks I trained on, wide Resnet 2810, I do believe it was around 4 hours, 20 minutes to train one wide Resnet 2810, whereas it probably took 4 hours. Sorry, forget the times. It took about 10% longer for the LGNN versions to train, and also inference. So like just passing test data through the network is literally identical.
Okay, and the next question is, did you ever get a chance to compare it with GraphCam? GraphCam is also a visualization tool for deep networks. How your work is differentiating with that?
So GraphCam is a type of visualizations which shows for each individual neuron how those neurons activated in different locations within the image. So the GraphCam images could be often compared to the Google Lucid visualizations. Both are different types of tools to visualize what types of images activate certain types of neurons. Yet again, tools like GraphCam can work in sync with my method, because my method just once you get a good understanding of what the filter is looking for, you can have an understanding of what the filters around it in a local area also look for. So for this question specifically, you can do a GraphCam of one of the filters on one specific image. And after you do the GraphCam on the one filter, if you look at my LGNN visualizations, those heat maps, you can probably already get a good idea of what the GraphCam images of the local area or the local cluster also look like, because they will be very similar to the GraphCam image generated by the one filter you already looked at.
Okay, thank you. As you said, this approach is for experts. So what do you suggest to freshers who are getting started in XAI? So what resources do you recommend to read and get an idea about your work and similar approaches?
Google themselves actually post several great blogs on deep learning and XAI in general. I'm forgetting the blog name off of the top of my head. But if you're looking for XAI methods specifically, not just deep learning, but XAI methods that do target beginners, you can look at methods like Lime, or you can look at Rehman's work on D-Lime, where these types of methods actually generate explanations as to why things are happening. Those types of methods where rather than being a tool that just generates more data, a tool that actually generates an explanation is more targeted towards people who are just starting in deep learning.
Thank you, Randy. Before we wrap up, are there any final thoughts that you would like to share with us?
Not much, but thank you very much for including me in your aggregate intellect community.
Randy, I thank you for a great presentation, and we thank all who joined us online. To see more free content like this, please visit our website at ai.science and log in to access slides from this and other sessions. Also, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, ML Papers Explained, to get notified about all the live sessions and other free content we publish. This concludes our event. Thank you for watching. We encourage you to all subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out our website at ai.science.